You guys all set? All right, we'll get this meeting going. It's 6:03, and I'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask that, Raquel, can you take the roll call, please?
Mark Prince. Kate McNulty. Brian Mahoney.
Here.
Jim Manny.
He's away.
Chip McGarr.
Present.
Raquel is present. Dave Palazetti.
Here.
Luke Murray.
Here. All right, move on to approval of meeting minutes. So I didn't get the other ones prepped prior to this meeting. I didn't give you enough time. So we do have, Brian, you gave me yours today? So I have like 5 that we need to get done the next meeting, high priority. So they will be done next meeting. Do I have all of the minutes that are outstanding and due? I think you gave me everything, and Raquel?
Outstanding with one.
One? Okay, so if I can get whatever's outstanding, I'd like to get everything up to date in one shot at the next meeting, please. All right, we'll move on to review, discussion, and action regarding public correspondence. Does anybody have any, so just for the public's benefit, the new process moving forward, and I talked to Kate about this, is in the interest of just putting the correspondence out there. We're putting them on the website now, so once a week I'm batching them like every Friday and putting them on the website. So if anyone here wants to see any of the public correspondence that comes into the building committee, you can go on. There's a compiled PDF document under feedback section of the website, and you can view that. So does anybody have any comments or insights into what was received in the last week that I sent out? No? All right. Just for the public's benefit, primarily what was received, we received opinions on both sides on Curtis Corner versus Columbia. And we received one regarding wireless communications inside of school buildings, concerns over that. So I won't go any further than that. The public's welcome to see the correspondence online. Are we good? Yes? Okay. So we'll move on. Chairperson's report, a couple items I want to review. So the inspection for the facilities condition index is getting coordinated. Brian, thank you for collaborating with the team that's going to do that. So the dates are when?
December 6th and 7th, one school each day.
Okay. So that'll be for Wakefield Elementary and Curtis Corner to go through. And again, just as a reminder, that's to evaluate the schools for the facility condition index score, which if it reaches above a certain threshold could qualify us for additional bonus reimbursement. So we're hoping, in this case, it's actually higher. We have to reach 65%. So that's ongoing. Brian's going to keep tracking on that. Thank you, Brian. Moving on, I did have a couple calls with Phil, primarily just to discuss what we're going to present tonight, the calendar, et cetera, and all of that will be presented tonight by Phil. I've also been working with Brian Sylvia, the town's finance director, and Steve Massaroni for PFM to figure out both the bond impact on different finance levels, as well as the impact, financial impact on different levels, so we can then present that information out to the town council and others once we have it. We're nearing completion on that, and I'll give you an update on the agenda item when I get to it. And that's all I have at this point. Does anybody have any questions or comments on what I've just presented? No? All right, we'll move on. So review, discussion, and/or action on the overall project schedule, milestones, and submission of the Stage 2 document to RIDE. Project schedule to be reviewed and refined. And Phil, I'll segue into your presentation because you're going to review the calendar, which was what we asked you to do at the last meeting. So the show is yours. Actually,
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I have a very brief agenda this evening. We'll give you a little bit of a follow-up from the workshop that we had on November 5th, and then we will start a discussion on the schedule and finish up with next steps. I think what I will be presenting will really spur some conversation amongst the building committee, and I would encourage that discussion. So some follow-up from the workshop that we had. Number one, I do appreciate everyone that comes out, particularly on a Saturday. We are sensitive to your time and recognize that this is an important issue for many of you, so coming out is greatly appreciated. But in general, there were equally strong opposing opinions on the following topics. For example, the results of the previous bond. There were varying opinions on that experience. The importance of adjacent athletics. Again, opposing opinions on whether that is an important component or not an important component. Same thing with the impact on swing space. Some thought it was an important component, some did not. And then the discussions on either known or unknown site considerations such as ledge and wetlands. We have done some preliminary investigation on the previous report. That data really is no longer applicable. There have been changes since then, so there still remain known and unknown site conditions. Going forward, when I tried to find some common data points, ones that would provide us direction going forward, I could really only find two. That doing nothing is not an option, so that's good. You all recognize that something must be done, and that the student impact should always be considered. Now, that varied on what people considered as impactful to students, whether it was swing space, whether it was athletics, but in general, student impact was important. I did not see a lot of comments on the educational programming behind any of this, which indicated to me that you believe programmatically any site would work if it's designed properly. And maybe that's because of Chip and his team's cooperation with us previously, and that we probably have a pretty good, solid educational plan going forward that we can fit into a building. But something we should keep in mind is that any common data points that we have to date has really been based on a small sampling of consistent folks who have been participating, which, only ranges from about 40 to 60 people out of, 35,000 residents. So we need to be mindful of that. So what does that mean for a path forward is I would encourage you to start spending some time discussing and defining the parameters of what a successful project will be. Because clearly the direction is not clear. So you probably need to start looking at other parameters. What is the financial impact? Does that start to indicate the project? What is the community sentiment and political will to pass a successful bond vote? Are there other data points that are worthy of further investigation? And leading into what the next steps may be, that is to better understand what is the town council and the school committee's priorities as it relates to other projects, as it relates to the elementary schools, as it relates to the middle school. When we look at the schedule, and you don't need to read all of this, but notice that the red arrow indicates a date around the end of January. And by the end of January, we really need to know what the final scope of this project is. And by the end of January, you saw images of a boat in other presentations. By the end of January, we all need to be in this same boat to complete the schedule and make our submission. And obviously, if that date slips, well, then the end date will slip accordingly. But for those who look at this presentation, there's a number of things that I'm including in here, which are meeting dates for the school building committee to refine the scope and their recommendation, presenting this project to the school committee, the town council, at multiple intervals to, number one, introduce the project, and then following up again several months later as a prep to their final meeting for an approval to submit. So this outlines the time that we need to reach that June 1st submission date that we set. But it does mean that we're all in the same boat by the end of January. So my recommendation for next steps is to move forward with discussions with the town council and the school committee. You need to solicit and overlay the guiding parameters that they may have to help you define what this project is going to be. We have generally 2 sites, but to date, the discussion has been focused only on the high school. And Kate, we just left a meeting at the middle school where you may be bringing up discussions later regarding that. And we haven't talked about the elementary schools in a while. So I think it's time to maybe solicit other opinions and their input. So that concludes the presentation.
Thanks, Phil. Brief one tonight. One thing I'll put a caveat on it, I only saw the calendar, yesterday? I think I got it. So I haven't really had a chance also to put it through the lens of when the town meetings happen. And I know that you had said you have it pretty heavy in January, but truth be told, we're likely, I think what I'd suggest is we start looking for guidance in early December, because we need, I think, some guidance moving forward, as you suggested.
So we have identified school committee dates and town council dates that are as accurate as they are advertised right now.
So I guess there's 2 components of this, right? One, just in general, the calendar. What you're telling us, we need a project by end of January in order for you to do the additional process required to create the stage 2.
Correct.
So I guess what I'm looking for from the committee is some discussion on your feelings on this and how to proceed. Dave, I'll start with you. Put you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts on this? Oh, yeah, we'll go ahead and. Sorry, I always go to you, but there's a big gap over here today. I don't want to deny the conversation. No, say your thoughts, and we'll give everyone equal opportunity.
I'll get my turn.
Go ahead, Kate.
So I think my thoughts are, number one, a decision needs to be made as to the high school site. And I don't think that's a decision that needs to be made at this table. I think that is a decision that needs to be made either school committee, town council, or combination. We can have a recommendation from our perspective, but the decision needs to be made, I think, like now, like quickly. And then because we have Broad Rock, we have just. Right now, we're cruising in on December, and we already have to have Broad Rock up and running with a 6, 7, 8 in September before any of this happens. And we need to have traffic flows, and we need to have, the building actually looked at, 'cause some of those classrooms are not actual classrooms they're called classrooms, but they're closets. And so we need to be looking at Broad Rock. We need to be looking at our elementary schools. What are we going to be doing? So we've spent a lot of time navigating around the high school. And yes, it's the most important as far as the biggest chunk of our funding. But we need to start looking at the full picture. So, there are a lot of dates here between now and January 26th. So I think we just need to start making some solid decisions and focus ourselves.
Chip? Thoughts?
Yeah, I think I agree with Kate that some input from school committee and town council would make sense in terms of picking a site, and then our job then becomes realizing what that could look like as a project. So, but I think we definitely need some of that input in terms of that. And Kate's right that we also have other aspects of this project we need to start discussing too.
Brian?
I agree with Kate and Chip. I don't really have much to add, but I think that's the right road to go down. Get with all the powers that be, go that route, and then start looking at the other schools also.
Coming from the meeting that we just left, there's a lot of planning that needs to be done with regards to budgeting, movement of students. There's a lot going on the school side with another closure of a school. So some guidance will help us with all these other moving parts. If we knew the location, then we can talk about what needs to be done. If it stays at the high school, then what do we need to do modification-wise to Curtis Corner in order to have the students placed there? That was our discussion briefly at the other meeting, but until we know that, we can't even begin the other parts of it.
Dave, I'll put you last before me.
That was quick. A lot to think about. So I think before, we can't just throw I'm going off your thing, we definitely need to make a decision on the high school site. But before we throw this in front of the school committee or the school, or the town council, we have additional information we still need. We requested information from the athletics department to see how it was going to work for the sport teams, if there's a preference one side or the other. We have some site conditions we need to at least rank order risks of going one way or the other, and we need to provide them as much information as possible. So when we set that date on the calendar, we need to back up some additional information we need to provide for them, and I think we do need to make them a recommendation. It's their decision, but I think we have to make, we're closer to the action, and we've got a brand-new town council mostly, or not mostly, but two-fifths of it, newish school committee members. So I think we owe them a recommendation, but it needs to be outlined with some items, whether there is a cost difference. I know Phil has said before that there isn't much of a cost difference. We have to highlight the issues with wing space. We have to highlight the benefits of one location or the other for athletics. I think for the educational program, as Phil had mentioned, it seems to be a push if we're going, either way. So I'll leave that at that. But what we also have to be real considerate about is the cost. So there might not be an appetite for 125 or 135, 40 million. And if the appetite's less than that, we have to give the off-ramp to a renovation at the existing site with athletic facilities and what those athletic facilities would look at. So I see kind of going way back to the good, better, best. I think we have two high school options, which is renovate in place with athletic fields at the recreation center area, or a new high school at one side or the other. And if it's at Columbia Street, same athletic facilities at the rec center. If it's at Curtis Corner, athletic facilities at Curtis Corner. And then, again, the input from athletics to say where the teams would actually play in practice, because we know it doesn't solve all the problems. So I'll put the high school piece away, and then I'll go over to Broad Rock. Absolutely need to do something with Broad Rock. Probably not going to get any construction done before it is, so the first year is just going to be kind of painful, but anything we can jumpstart would be beneficial. So my question is, and I don't know if anybody here can answer that, is what in the original plan way back, that was the original stage one that was back to RIDE before, didn't we get permission to do some work at Broad Rock?
Stage 2 approval?
The stage 2-ish, whatever came out of the last one, I remember it going back to the schools. So I don't know if you can talk to that, because if we have the ability to get reimbursement for work at Broad Rock, if there was money in the school budget or somewhere else, we could start that work now, at least the design work.
Well,
I think Raquel, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So we do have an approved Stage 2, which was the part of the last project that was approved. It is for maintenance. That was the original approval was for maintenance. One of the schools is Broad Rock. We're not allowed to use general operational funds and get reimbursement. It would have to be out of a capital fund in order to do that. And it is broad, so any maintenance at the school can be done. If we wanted to shift in a different direction, we do have the need to call Mario Carino at RIDE so we can ask him this question, as well as we do have the ability to do a one-time amendment to that approval. And if we know what we want to do with all the schools, then that's an option to get the approval to amend and start the projects now and get the reimbursement.
Oh, thank you, that's great news, and I think that is something we have to explore, to get that amendment, to look at maybe moving some walls, doing some work at the robotics room. I know we talked about moving the back room, possibly some roadway safety improvements. If we could at least get the money now to start the design, we're that much further. We don't have to wait until next November to get a bond vote. And it would only be 1 year of issues at Broad Rock. The following summer, you could do the repairs and have that open. So I recommend we really explore that for Broad Rock. I will back off on the elementary schools because I think there's a decision that needs to be made there if we're trying to do 3 elementary schools improvements, or if we're going to look at the future 10 years out and say maybe we should only focus on 2. That's another school committee decision that is not at our level, but I think that's some direction we would have to have. If that's for the future, then we should heavily invest in whatever elementary, or not heavily invest, but we need to invest in whatever elementary schools are going to be here for the long term. That needs to be decided. So I think I probably added more questions than answers, but that's my thoughts.
That was good. So I guess I look at it, I agree with many of you. I look at it as a tiered decision process. I do think, I agree, we need guidance at this point, because getting opinions from different sides really isn't helpful at this point. Like, we have a couple projects, but there's a couple answers we need. One is, the big one is the tolerance related to the fiscal impact. So that's why I'm aggressively working on getting those numbers, because I'd like to get that in front of council and say, based on our concepts, which can be prettied up, but in essence, you have full-on renovation, reconstruction, reconstruction projects from ground up. And they're gonna be, whatever it is, $140 million. Here's your 2 concepts, either one, pick one, but that's the ballpark. Let's call it 130 to 140. Is there an appetite for that? We have other needs. We know that. So we could show a good, better, best renovation option as well. But a lot of this is, the first decision is, if there's no appetite for a full ground up, forget about what site it's going at. We know where it's going at. So that decision's made. And then you can move to the next step of your decision-making process. If there is somewhat of an appetite, then the next question is there an appetite to continue to data gather to establish which site is best? There's a political community component of this that we're not in charge of, and that's okay. Either body may say, by a majority vote, this doesn't work for us. We want you to follow this path, building committee. We take direction and we move forward. So I think that would be extremely helpful, because there's 2 decisions there. One is let the process play out, go get the data, or we just don't think there's an appetite out there for this Curtis Corner option, in which case we're telling you just focus on Columbia. Okay, that's guidance. So I think that's the kind of clear guidance we need to then take the torch and keep moving forward. Either option, I think, will be programmatically. I think we agree on this. Either option, either site would fit programmatically in general for the students. There's plus minuses on both sides, but there's other tangential things that come out of this decision-making process that just don't fall into our court. I think as far as Broad Rock, I agree with Dave. I don't think this year is maybe an option as far as construction, but if we have the stage 2, we need to research that. We have to come up with the funding. So is that a separate bond? Because we're not going to fund it through the budget. So that's a whole nother component. You're going to float a very small bond to start with, which takes some time. So I wouldn't expect any construction to occur there for a bit. But I think, to Dave's point, I think it's worth vetting out and seeing what the possibilities are. What can we do to advance construction? Again, it fits in the larger pie. Whatever you borrow short-term is going to get cobbled together in this large project number. And that gets into what we talk about appetite to fund the project. Sorry, Dave, did you have it?
No, I agree with that. I was just going to say, I wouldn't necessarily say you need a bond to do the work of Broad Rock. I don't know if it's that dollar value. You're closing 2 schools. There should be some savings within the school budget and maybe the town budget to shift money into the capital account to kick off that work. You're only looking at design work now. You're not looking at the actual construction. It's not a lot of money. If you were able to expedite maybe the roadway work, even that's not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things, and I think you could probably do that out of existing savings. I don't know your numbers, but I'm just thinking 2 schools closing, there's got to be some savings there.
So it's a discussion, right? I think we need to know the number, and then the administrations need to come together and figure out, can it be funded through the budget through either cost reductions or other? And then if they can't, then we have to look at other. And we're not there yet, right, quite frankly. So the first step is getting with Mario, so we can do that, get some answers. Phil, we need to figure out the extent of the renovations required. So I think we can walk and chew gum on that. Personally, I would like to get in front of the town council and school committee in early December to get the guidance, because we need it. At the same time, we can continue on, Phil, I'll point to you again, is walking and chewing gum. We can continue to look at the elementary schools, get numbers, continue to look at Broad Rock more specifically, get numbers, and we can shift focus while the other process is going on. That keeps the things rolling. That would be my suggestion. Does everyone kind of see that as a good way to go about approaching this? Okay. So Phil, I think right now the direction would be, what I'm hearing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is to start working on Broad Rock, more specifically on what you heard today and other, and like does that look like? And then we'll get some answers from Mario. We need to figure out the number that we need to get that school into shape. And then at the same time, the elementary schools, which you've already done some work on this, on the elementary schools, just kind of solidifying that. I think what we'll have to do is, when we present to the different elected bodies, is bring that into the conversation as this a la carte menu of saying, this costs this costs that, these are all the things. And I think at some point in the very near future, probably our next meeting, the school buildings committee is going to have to kind of weigh in and say, you know, either we just describe the needs, or we rank the needs, or what? Because there is going to be a question on how desperate, like if you truly want a high school at $140 million, and we go all in on that, is the building committee okay with that? Like, can the other needs wait? Or is the roof falling in? You know, what do you have to do, and what do you want to do? That would be my question if I sat up there. So I think we're going to have to give some clear direction to the town council and school committee on what we think is the recommended, because that is our responsibility. Does everyone agree with that? Okay. So Phil, you good with that? I forget our next meeting. I don't have it in front of me. But what I will do is work with the town manager and, go ahead. Did you? Okay. Okay, so that'll be, the first town council meeting, full session is the 28th. But I think this is going to be worthy of a special session, which I'll work with Jim on and the council, and when we'll communicate with Mark on seeing what we can do with school committee. Do we think that should be this is a question, do we think that should be a joint meeting or individually bartered out? Keep in mind, both have weight in this process, right? When the stage 2, school committee recommends to town council on the project, town council is the ultimate authority on the funding. Don't all answer at once. I don't have all answers, I'm asking. All right, so let's do this.
From a time constraint perspective, joint meeting makes logical sense, but that's going to be, like this, each body, I think, should be discussing it amongst themselves. It's kind of like,
Yeah, it might,
we need to
create-
be able to discuss it amongst our own bodies.
Well, and it might go back to your point that we need to have a dollar value. So maybe it just goes to the town council, and with the town manager, the town council, they state what their cap of dollar value is. And if it comes out that it's $85 million, pick a random number, then we know the new high school's out. And then we don't have to even have that discussion and that decision. So I think that's, probably has to start with the town council. If their appetite is 150 million or 50 million, we need to know.
does everyone agree with that? It sounds logical to me, Dave. So we'll do that. We'll try to set something up early December. In the meantime, I still would like to give an update to the school committee.
So,
I don't know if you're gonna,
I know at our next meeting, which is Tuesday, November 22nd, there's going to be, there's a moment slot there to get a school building committee update. You're welcome to come and do it. I'll introduce you.
what's that?
I said, you're welcome to come and do it. I'll introduce you, or I can do it on behalf.
Yeah, I would be fine with that. But I, certainly, anybody else is, as long as we don't have a quorum doing it, is welcome. But, yeah, I think we just want to give a brief update where we're at, what our intentions are, so everyone's on the same page. We do have new members of both council and the school committee, so I think getting everyone on the same information platform is critical, and then everyone feels part of the process. So we'll do that. We'll count on the 22nd. I'll work on the December. Anything else on that? Okay. I will continue to work with Phil on refining that schedule, right? And I think that's it. Did anyone have anything? So we talked a lot about the calendar and updates to council. You also had a very short component on the workshop. So that's the next item on our list. They were kind of merged in your presentation, Phil, but did anyone have any observations or epiphanies or anything on just general feelings on how it went at the workshop?
I mean, I thought it went well. It was a lot of the same faces, but there were a number of new faces, which was nice. I just think we need to continue to do them. We need some more. And I think we need some, and we keep talking about it, but a more robust manner to invite more people so that we have a bigger, broader outreach of getting more different voices to the table. But I thought it was done well. Good information was shared on both sides. I thought do we have I know you shared with us the feedback. Is that for public consumption? Has that been put up on our school building?
That actually hasn't yet. I shared it with the committee, but I'll put it out tomorrow
Okay,
on the
yeah.
website.
Because I think because while I agree with you, there were definitely opposing views. There was, and it's hard to say, who put the comment in the box, but there was definitely, there was like a majority voice on a particular perspective that was shared. But again, we don't know who put what comment in. You could have put 5 in, whatever. So it's pretty anonymous. But it was still spoke volumes as to your point, something needs to be done. But I will say that majority, agreed that Columbia Street was the route we should be focusing on. But we do want to make sure that we tread carefully as far as making the right decision, not just the forced decision.
So I'll put that on tomorrow. I think it was just a recording of basically minutes and the feedback on the session. So we'll put that out for public consumption. I'll put that on where I've been placing all the presentations. So the presentation did get up on there, and the video is available for those who missed it. So anybody else have any insights? Brian?
I think the format was really good, how these weekend meetings have been going, with the presentation from Phil and Luke, the survey, and then that open period where people can look at all the buildings, look at all the aerial views that we had, and then even just come up and introduce themselves, discuss whether they want to just say, hey, nice to meet you, or if they want to discuss one of the buildings. I think having that open forum has really been helpful in this process. And then the discussion afterwards, where we did the community comment, and letting people speak and letting people, you know, if they just want to get it out, or if they want to bring something to the table or ask us to do something as a committee. I think they've been going really great, the two that we've had so far.
Thanks, Brian. Anybody else? So I think we had some really good requests for different data points. You know, depending on what happens with the guidance that we receive, you know, we still need to continue with the process. So I think we received what we set out to attain to do, which is, you know, what are your concerns? So, and I think it was a good open process and discussion. So, at this point, I'll ask. I have discretion on public comment to do it after items. These two items were merged on item number 6. Does anybody have any public comment on these two specific items, calendar or the workshop? And if not, we will have general public comment at the end of the meeting. Okay. So then we'll move on with the agenda. We have review and discussion and action regarding draft project evaluation matrix. I don't know if we have anything on that tonight, so we're going to move on. Update and discussion regarding the school building financial analysis. I put this on because I mentioned earlier we are working with Steve Massaroni from PFM, who's our town financial advisor, who's gone through this process with many towns. He's pretty well known throughout the state. We asked him and his firm to run a scorecard on the bond ratings. I don't have it conclusively yet. I'm meeting with him in a week, but I can tell you that there's, I think it goes to Kate's point earlier, right? If you never borrow anything, there's no impact. So because we're potentially borrowing money, there's likely to be an impact on the scorecard, the bond rating. It's right now a AA1, just the highest bond rating in the state. Part of the reason for that is because we have almost zero OPEB liability. We're one of the best in the state. We have high incomes. We have very low leverage because we owe very little to any debt. We're in a very good financial picture. However, it's just like your house. You can be super rich and your house can be falling down as well. So there's always a balance of taking out debt and making sure you're doing the necessary repairs, and if you need to take out debt. So I say that only because I'm not saying that we should incur debt, but when we present this, there's likely going to be an impact at a certain level. How high that is, I don't know. And how hard that is, I don't know. So it's likely to downgrade us on the bond rating. That's what's likely to be presented to council. How much, I don't have definitive answers on yet, but that will be a consideration for the town council and the administration moving forward. You know, there is sort of a pride in having a high bond rating, and AA2 is still a high bond rating, but it's not the highest. So along with that, we're working out the financials. I'm working with Brian to get it down, as we said before. What really we want to get it down to is what is the tax on the average household? Like, what is the impact? And also looking at ways to show council, okay, if you were to do this, how would you roll that out? Because it's not like you need to, when we take, let's say we were to take bonds out, you don't roll all that debt out at once. You know, it's over a course of several years, and you typically incrementally build into the budget the money to cover that debt. So how would that work? And to really understand the impact, because I think that's a fair, unless you give a fair assessment of how this would work, you can't make good decisions. Ultimately, it's going to be the decision of the council on, the appetite based on the information presented and any recommendations on which way they want to go. So that's why I say this is a critical component. I know everyone's sort of focused on Curtis Corner versus Columbia at the moment, but really it's, what does this project look like financially? Because if, $80 million project, a $40 million project is going to be much different than 140. And that just is. You have to pay for it. So does anybody have any questions on, go ahead, Brian.
Will that analysis, for our purposes and for town council's purposes, for the bond rating show $50 million bond, 100 million, 150, when it's all broken out?
So what I've done is to make it easy, as easy as possible, is to say, run it at 50, 75, 100, 125, 150. You can interpolate between those amounts, so where you would run. We will break down each of those thresholds. So that way, it's very clear on what the different impact levels would be, and then also what the tripping point is on the scorecard where you downgrade on a bond level. So that, because those are key decision points. Any other questions? Okay. We'll keep working on that critical piece. Like I said, I think by the next meeting, we'll have information on that, and then we'll have information to share out with the council. Discussion and action, public outreach and communication activities.
I have a question on that.
Sure.
So a community member approached me at the forum and asked, she received a mailing, and I'm not saying this to get anyone in trouble. She received a mailing from the town for the 300th year celebration of I believe it's the lighting here, the tree lighting or decorative lighting for the holidays. And her question was the same question she asked us at the very first building committee meeting that she attended was, the town can reach me when I have a tax bill that needs to be paid, and apparently the town can reach her when there's a lighting here, which is awesome, I'm not complaining about it. The question then is, why can't the town reach her when there is a community forum? And the question that I have is, what mailing list, and I even hate bringing this topic up, what mailing list did the town use in order to get that mailing out? Was it a Parks and Rec mailing? Was it an actual Town of South Kingstown mailing? And it went to adults, so I'm not too concerned about it. But if we wanted to send a mailing to the adults in our community, could we tap into that same source to make sure that our next community forum actually arrives at every household?
So I'll tell you what I know, I'll tell you what I don't know, and then I'll definitely fill in the gaps later. What I know is that is a separate committee. They're hard chargers, and they are out there, they've done a lot. So they did have money allocated to them through council, $20,000, I believe it was, that the town kind of backed their activities. They may have taken it out of that to spend on the mailers. I don't know. I don't know what mailing list they use. So what I will do is get with Terry Murphy, who's been our liaison with that committee, to determine how that was done, how many households it went out to. Because I can tell you, mailing to every household, which 14,000-ish, it's a lot of money. So I don't think, and we have zero budget. So that's a very intensive, as anyone who's run campaigns knows, and you typically on a campaign, you select, you're selective. But I don't think it's it's worthy of discussion. And I do think that, we have done things with tax bills go out, and sometimes you can include mailers with those because it's a double whammy as long as you're not increasing the weight of that package. So I don't have an answer on all of that, so I'm not very helpful right now, but I will get answers on how that was done. I'll take the feedback. I just caution, it is typically expensive to put out mailers, so you want to be very selective on the events that you put out that way. There's much more cost-effective ways of doing it, but we can see. I think it's reasonable feedback. So I will have an answer by the next meeting, or I'll put it out email. Did somebody have a? Okay. So I think the larger picture here, yeah. I don't know if everyone got the mailing. The larger picture is this. We're looking for ways to increase in community engagement. So I think we need to look at it and see if if we can't afford the mailers, what other things can we do to get creative? Could we put it in the tax bills? Could we do something that's piggybacking? Could we get with the other committees that are already sending out something? Like, had we known that was going out, could we have piggybacked somehow? So I think that's a reasonable request. What we are doing to, what we have improved upon, we put it out to all the boards and commissions for the workshop. We had signs in every single facility. We had signs there that day because we had feedback that wasn't really signed when people got there. So we had signs out front, we had signs on the doors. We've increased, the robustness of the website to be more community, I hope, more community-friendly and put all the pieces of information on there. So that's what we have been doing, but I think we can agree there's room for improvement. But along those lines, other suggestions. Does anybody else, we've heard one suggestion, does anybody else have any thoughts on ways that we can improve on community output? I mean, we're all ears on creativity for communication, so, okay. Keep it in mind too, it's us that do it. We don't, and I'll put out my plea again. Anybody has a marketing background or has time on their hands that want to help the committee get the word out and just do some legwork, that's helpful too. We did have some people, and I thank you, take the flyers for the last meeting and do some door-to-doors. That's always extremely helpful. But what neighborhoods get hit or not hit get limited to the people in those neighborhoods willing to do that effort. So it's helpful, but a broader effort would be appreciated. Anything else on that item? All right, then we'll move on. Really, we're at general public comment right now, so I'll invite anybody up. We'll keep it to the 3-minute time frame for comments. Does anybody like to come to the podium and make any general comments on the presentation tonight or other? Come on up. You keep the time.
I just want to say really quickly, sorry. Yeah, no, cool. Oh, you're cool. I just wanted to say quickly that as somebody who sat on the last one of these committees, community engagement is by far one of the most difficult parts of this gig, and I think you guys are doing a really good job. I think these posters are amazing. I think the flyers were great. I'm seeing different things pop up all over the place. The information train seems to be better than it was last time. Keep up the good work. Anything that I can do to help, I will absolutely do. I have a Main Street business. I don't know if you guys, the only thing I can think of is Washington Trust. Have you set up, you know how they let somebody come in and go there? That a lot of people are in and out of there. Maybe there. And I will keep brainstorming, but keep up the good work, because I think you're doing a great job.
I'll add to the restroom on along the bike path on Wakefield is part of Parks and Rec, and we could easily, even if we just put it in the windows, so people could see it from the outside, as the holiday season picks up and people are shopping down there, we could have that. But I would really like the town council vote before we start putting up brand new high school pictures and get people excited only to find out we're not doing that. So I think it would have to go after we have an idea of what the scope is. But we definitely could advertise our meetings there in the meantime.
It's a good suggestion. We'll get some out there. Come on up.
I was just going to say, the last flyer was good, but I think that it didn't, I know you're trying to not sell a project and trying to be very neutral, but it didn't really indicate that we were talking about facilities. So I think a little bit, because I was part of distributing 250 of those flyers, but I think people didn't really know that that's what was happening. So it's a fine line between keeping things neutral and making sure that people know what you're actually talking about, because I think it said something like, come talk about our schools or something like that. So it could be like programming or CTEs or whatever, but it didn't necessarily say, we're talking about our facilities again, so.
That's good input, and actually, I noticed that myself. It wasn't until too late. As I reread it, because we had a little pushback at the polls, because it was a concern about confusion with the school bond. And because of the vagary in the language, I think there was concern that it was promoting the state bond somehow. Somehow there was a conflict, so. Point of improvement. All right, come on up.
So I want to go back to the financing piece for just a second. Because a couple of weeks ago, maybe even a month ago, Phil, you had talked about RIDE will only recognize $92 to $98 million if we spend it for a high school, wherever it is, correct? Isn't that what you said a month ago? Like those
Yeah, so it was,
703 students times 500 and something square foot and blah, 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 yes, right? So my question, when we provide information to the community, when you say a new high school, wherever it may be located, knocked down, rebuilt, is 140 million, the town borrows 140 million, RIDE recognizes only 52% of 98 million, just go with 50. So the town then assumes the other 90 million in debt, correct? I'm just,
so when we present,
right,
what Brian and I are working on is a weighted average.
right,
And so we're very clear on, while we talk about 52% reimbursement, and before we get into complexities of, well, you're getting 52% of 98 and this and that, is saying the weighted average is 34.3%. Without bonuses, you would be at 25.2%.
right. But the back of the napkin, just like if I were to explain to someone, the community bonds 140 million for a high school, RIDE is only going to reimburse based on 92 to 98 million. So the town has to come up with some way to fund the difference. So if you, 140 minus 50, there's 90 million. We're taking on 90 million in debt. Correct?
Potentially. And we're still even working on the 98 number because, again, the discussions with Mario, so I just have to be careful.
Right.
But in general, yes.
But there's a limit to what RIDE will say you're getting back for your high school. We could spend 200 million on a high school, and RIDE's going to say we're only going to give you X, correct?
Correct.
So that needs to be clear to the community, because I think it's a right? You see, like, because it sounds great, but we're not getting 50% of 140 million. We're only getting 50% of whatever that RIDE number is. And so that's what I think it sounds like a really great idea, but then we're really not getting back the same amount. So I just want to provide as much financial information so everyone knows that. Because that tiny high school, 703 times 512, it was, that kind of actually needs to be in the slide as well, so that people understand what's there and what's not there. Because it's kind of like, you're kind of sad because you don't get it's not enough to do what we want unless the community is willing to take on the other side. And that's what the community needs to be aware of.
Yep, I'm picking up what you're throwing down. I get it. And that's why I talk about the weighted average and being clear on the tax rate and what's going to be on the state.
Right.
I think what it really comes down to is dollars and cents, right? We talk about percentages, but percentages are vague, right? You could say, we say 52%. That's why I shy away from that, because the truth is in numbers is that X amount will be funded by the town, X amount's funded by the state,
Right.
regardless of percentages.
And just a question, no one has to answer it now, but Curtis Corner, Broad Rock was used previously as a 6, 7, 8 school. So I sat in the audience, just a little confusing that it wouldn't be appropriate for this. So I think to explain to the community why that needs to be tweaked and in what ways, because it was used, I don't know, when we had 4,300 students, it was full. And so is it a size issue? Is it a facility? To be more clear, because I sat there and I said it always was a 6, 7, 8 school. It was designed that way, so it's confusing why it doesn't meet the needs now. So just to be more open with information for people who no longer have a kid in the district to understand why it would need something. Now I understand it's the driveway or that makes sense, but just to be more comprehensive, not just to say, we need to do stuff at Broad Rock, because I'm confused on that. Thank you.
I think my question would be regarding that is, when it moved from a 5, 6, 7, 8 to from a 6, 7, 8 to a 5, 6, were there modifications made to classrooms at that point in time? Because, like, things were moved and so forth, because the top level, for example, doesn't match the bottom level in terms of what the rooms look like. Were some of the middle school rooms modified to be more elementary level rooms? I don't have an answer to that because that was before my time, but I know that based on it being a 6, 7, 8, it doesn't seem like there were like enough lab spaces, for example, and so I just wonder if there was any modifications made there. Minor, not major, but like things being removed, that would be my question as I walked around the building, not recently, but when I was in my prior role, I was in there a lot, so that was always something I wondered.
Well, and to the point is, that needs to be a robust discussion at this table, and we need to start talking about it. So, yep.
Good points. Anybody else? What's that? Yep, come on up.
Hi, Jennifer Demetric. Listening to what Deb said, and we've talked a lot about the high school renovation or whether we're going to build a new one, and looking at the numbers between, say, 50,000 to 140,000. I was kind of under the impression that maybe that $140,000 was to be some maybe renovations at Broad Rock, or we're going to do updates at the elementary schools. This is a question. Are we just bonding to get a high school, or are we including the other buildings? Because we're not talking about just 700 kids then. So we're talking about a different number of kids. What is the number that RIDE would give us if, say, we were talking about 2,000 kids as opposed to 700? I just hope that, we can communicate that to the community as well as to people listening to this. I mean, because it's a very good point. We were talking about how that could be 50%. Yeah, that's not going to be 104. We're not going to build a high school that's $140 million and, have an athletic field, but not touch the rest of the schools with that money. It's got to be, we need the larger picture to match the number with what the reach of our project is. And I also want to say thank you for the idea of putting out what the impact on the bond rating would be if we were to do 50,000, 75,000, 100,000. That's fantastic, and where we're going to be at our breaking point. That's a huge piece, I think, for the community as well to look at and say, all right, this is where I draw my threshold, where my agreement is with this project and where I just can't agree with it. Right now, you have a lot of people just saying, $140 million, I'm not going to vote for that. So I think when you have that number to present to people, some people are really gonna fall in step with you and say, yeah, we can get behind this. So I was just confused, and I wanted to make sure that I was clear that we are talking about some other projects as well as not just the high school building. Okay, thank you.
So the short answer is we are going to evaluate all of those projects. Where we fall is still undetermined.
And it's still, we need to know what the town can,
Yeah, what the financial
appetite
threshold
is, yeah.
Yep.
So it is a two-point thing. I think it was a really good point. We have to have that first information from the town council on what they're willing to spend, but they can't go in completely blind. We have to give them some, we don't want to just draw a line in the sand based on bond rating, because if they go an extra $5 million, maybe they get a lot more than they would have gotten with less. So I think we still have to provide them information on what we're thinking in those good, better, best type scenarios. But then I would say after the dollar value is set, then it goes back to the school committee. I think they're the ones that say, oh, we got $130 million. You know what? Let's put it all at the high school right now. Or, no, we're going to step back and give some of it to Broad Rock, some of it. I think you need to, on the school committee side, need to give us direction on where that could go. Because if the town council sets us up at $130 million, from what Phil's been telling us, that's not going to do anything but the high school. So we can't have the town council say it's 130 million and the school committee come back and say, yeah, we want it all, because that's just not gonna work. So we need to be really clear on what each one of those dollar values buys and where those lines are, if that makes sense.
It's good points. All right, do we have any more public comment tonight? No? I don't see any hands. Oh, yep, go ahead, Phil.
Just a couple of points that not everyone may be aware of, that all of the school construction bonds were passed during the election. And that included some very large ones, 125 for North Providence, over 200 for Pawtucket. I don't know how much Warwick was.
300.
How much?
300 million?
300 in Warwick. So, that's almost $500 million that was passed. And the $250 million for the state was passed. So clearly there is a lot of momentum and importance placed upon it. I understand the voters' concern, making sure it's spent responsibly. I do think I want to make one clarifying statement between the amount that RIDE will reimburse, which is formula-based on a new construction project. A renovation project, there is no formula. That's based on the cost estimates that are provided. But just the other day, in the newspaper, the neighboring community that is building a new high school is suffering with a $20 million gap. And, I said this before, and I don't think I'm being reckless, but it's important to know that at this time, if you're building a new high school, there could be a gap. And that gap would likely have to be locally funded, and there could be bond premiums and stuff like that, but all of that gets a little bit more complicated than what we need to talk about now. So a lot of good points. The whole financial impact is really a much deeper discussion. Dave, I agree with you, after knowing some guidelines, it's probably more prudent than to really dive into that question. That's it.
Thanks, Phil. And just to clarify, I think what you're talking to is we could come out and say, we think we can build a high school for 98 million, which what you're saying is you've covered that gap in your estimates that you presented to us. So that's why you have that 40 million or whatever, right? So we're being honest in numbers on what that project will actually cost, as opposed to being a little bit reckless and saying, well, let's just go into it with 100 million and then we'll deal with it later, which is what other communities have done, right? So correct. So, pay now, pay later. And I think I think that's our goal, is to be honest with the numbers and be honest with the project and not drop it on voters later and say, we have half a high school, we need more money. I think that would be a shared goal. Okay, I didn't see any further public comment, so scheduling next meeting, we said December 1st, right? And same place, same time. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Just wanted to, I don't know if maybe go around one more time if anybody says closing comments, because I know I do, because I like to talk and hear myself do so. I don't want to go home. It's too early. I'll start eating. It's bad. There is a football game. Now I lost my train of thought. No, I really, and I don't want to put the pressure on Mark because he's not here, and Terry because he's not here, so I'll put it on Chip. I really think we need the athletics information to provide that to the town council school committee on the site location. There are pros and cons at each. I heard from the community forum about, going from Columbia Street to the rec center is not great for, people with disabilities. I also heard from people that the rec center site is awesome for sports facilities because then the middle school gets to share it with the high school. So there's pros and cons all over the place, and I'd really just want to hear from the experts what their opinion is.
Yeah, I know that Mark and Terry are working on that.
Thanks.
Can we just put a request to say on the agenda for the 12/1 meeting, can we have a slot for athletics? And then if they're not ready, they don't have to speak, but to just put it there, just to nudge people in that direction.
Maybe a little read ahead before the meeting and then present at the meeting. Not that I'm anxious, but I just think there's a lot there.
Yeah, we'll track on that. I'll reach out to the schools as well and see.
Yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons to each site, but it keeps coming back to the athletic facilities being located adjacent or not adjacent. So I really think that needs to be fleshed out. So we're not, you know, making a poor decision. And the middle school, you know, is, I'll say it again, they have a baseball team and a soccer team, and Broad Rock doesn't have either of those.
And I don't want to stray too far, but I will say, as far as the next agenda too, I am going to put on, Phil, we talked a little bit about wetlands flagging and making sure, I also want to make sure the rec site is a true option. You know, I don't, impartially the way, but we have to show, again, truth in numbers, that we can fit the program. Because there is, you know, there is some concerns there site-wise. So Phil and I talked briefly about how we'd maybe go about getting that information sooner than later. So I'll put that on the agenda as well. All right. We good? All right. Kate, did you have something else, or? You sure? You don't want to stay? All right, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make that motion.
Thanks, Chip. Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes.